everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you guys a video that is going to be all about the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. For those of you guys that may not know, this is the prequel to the original Hunger Games trilogy. In fact, I just posted a reading vlog where I reread those books for the very first time. So if you are curious to hear my thoughts, definitely go check that. I will link it up in the cards. But I personally wanted to go into this book completely blind. I can tell you the only thing I knew about this book was that it was going to be a prequel set during the 10th annual Hunger Games, so 64 years before the first book begins, and that it was going to center around Coriolanus Snow, who we know as President Snow in the original Hunger Games trilogy, and he is an 18-year-old boy, and that's really all I knew going into this. Now, for this video, what I'm thinking I'm going to do is I'm going to do a spoiler-free reading vlog as part one, I guess, of this video. So if you haven't read the book yet, I am not going to be spoiling any major events. I will, of course, be discussing characters and their traits and maybe their relationships with one another. And I will, of course, be discussing the world, but like I said, nothing that will spoil your reading experience. And then the second part of this video is going to be a spoiler-filled discussion where I will obviously be talking about major events that happen and my reactions to them. Right now, I did just start reading this a couple of hours ago. I am about 3 hours into the audiobook, and that is exactly page 100, and that is chapter 7. And I already have some thoughts. I think overall, if I'm being honest, I'm not really sure what to think of this book right now. It has a very, very, very different vibe from the original trilogy, for sure. Something that literally made me cackle while I was reading these first 100 pages, I had a realization that this is reminding me of Monsters University, which, you know, is the prequel to Monsters, Inc. And that may sound like completely idiotic, and I fully recognize that I'm an idiot, but my reasoning behind that is because, you know, we're centering on a major character, you know, from the original trilogy, and now we're seeing him as a teenager and we're seeing him in school. And I think that alone just gives me Monsters University vibes. And I don't know, just like seeing him in class is very strange, you know, and seeing him interact with like his classmates and all of the people around him, it's just very weird. This is a very different character from who we see in the original trilogy. You know, this is what I'm assuming to be a villain origin story. And so I have been surprised. For some reason, I expected his character to be really not likable from the get-go, but he's actually a pretty normal guy right now. Okay, first things first, I do not remember learning this in the first book, but Reaping Day takes place on July 4th, which is like another level of messed up. I don't even know what to say about that. And then also pretty early on, this is like page 14, I think, Snow is, I mean, it's from Snow's POV, so no, it's third. Oh, that's weird. Okay, so my brain. This is third person, but it is from Coriolanus's POV. So that's strange, given that the Hunger Games was first person from Katniss's perspective. That's an interesting choice. On page 14, we are introduced to the fact very early on in this book that Panem has a long way to go to where they're going to be, you know, for the 74th Hunger Games. So the Hunger Games were, of course, established right after the Dark Days and the war, but we're seeing now that, you know, it's been 10 years since they were first established, and they are still very much trying to figure out what they want the games to be and what they want to do with them. So on page 14, we're introduced to the fact that in the past, the tributes would be dumped into the Capitol Arena and the now dilapidated amphitheater that had been used for sports and entertainment events before the war, along with some weapons to murder one another. Viewing was encouraged in the Capitol, but a lot of people avoided it. How to make it more engaging was the challenge, and so far in the first 100 pages, that is something that is very much being discussed at this academy that Coriolanus goes to. He's essentially at this like elite private school in the capital. And so to go along with that, what they've decided to do is that this is the first year they are introducing the idea of having mentors for the tributes. And what they're doing is they're pairing teenagers from the capital that go to this elite academy with these tributes from the districts, which I think is a very weird decision. It doesn't really make any sense to me. I feel like from the get-go, it would make the most sense to pair up these teenagers with actual adults. And so he also goes to say, everyone agreed that if the Hunger Games were to continue, they needed to evolve into a much more meaningful experience, and the pairing of the capital youth with the district tributes had people intrigued. So that's kind of the only explanation we get as to why they're pairing up capital teenagers with these district tributes. Ooh, and I wanted to talk about Lucy Gray Baird, who is the girl tribute from District 12. And this is who Coriolanus Snow ends up getting assigned to mentor. And at first he is very upset about getting assigned to the girl from District 12 because everybody knows that District 12 is the lowest district, of course. And so getting assigned a mentee from that district is really terrible. But then we see that this girl is something else. Like, her reaping ceremony was absolutely insane. I'm not gonna spoil what goes on for that. She's dressed in this very like brightly colored like rainbow dress, and she's a singer, which is the reference to like Songbirds and Snakes is like Coriolanus Snow, because like I discussed in my Hunger Games vlog, like they reference all the time that he has like snake-like eyes. And it seems like Suzanne Collins is kind of painting her and where she came from as kind of like a gypsy-like kind of background, just with like the kind of clothing that she wears. She's a singer, she's a dancer, she's an entertainer. Lucy also is giving me serious Luna Lovegood vibes from the Harry Potter series. There's straight up quotes that Lucy says that I really feel like Luna would say. They just both have this very quirky and weird kind of energy to them. I just think she's such a compelling character already, so I'm very excited to see more from her. We're already seeing this interesting friendship between Coriolanus and Lucy, so now I'm interested to see if they end up like falling in love, what's gonna happen with them. But yeah, with that being said, I'm glad that I've gotten my thoughts out there about this book so far, because it is making me excited to get back into it. I'm hoping to get to page like 200 by the end of tonight. All right guys, so I'm just about past the halfway mark on the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I love the design on this cover. So I am on page 302, and I think that's just about 55% of the way through. I did want to talk about Snow's character a bit because I find the way that Suzanne Collins is portraying him to be very interesting, because on the one hand, she is showing that he has some very clear prejudices about a lot of different things, I guess you could say. And throughout this book, we see that all these capital people have very clear prejudices about people from the districts. There's a very clear divide between people from the capital and people from the districts, and Snow also kind of has these prejudices. I will say he's not as problematic as some of his classmates in the academy. I don't know, so while she's definitely including little tidbits here and there of the person he's going to become, because he does have very strong views about how to control the population of Panem and things like that. And at the beginning of the book, he's already made it clear that he wants to one day be president, so we are seeing that. But at the same time, we see that he has some compassion. The way that he is around Lucy is also very interesting, because I predicted this. They're kind of developing a romantic relationship, at least before the game started. Now that the games are going on right now, obviously they have no way of really communicating with one another. I don't know, I think I like him and Lucy together. I'm just very interested to see like how this whole relationship develops through the rest of this book, because like I said, I'm only about halfway through. And also I will say Snow is very charismatic, he's very charming. You know, he does know how to manipulate the people around him, which are really great qualities to have if you want to eventually be the leader of a country. As the protagonist of this story, I think he's kind of middle of the road. I'm not obsessed with his character. I think I'm just accepting it, and I'm very interested to see what happens throughout the rest of this book. I also want to talk about Tigress for a little bit. So Tigress is actually Snow's cousin. And we met her towards the very end of Mockingjay because she essentially owned like a clothing store, and she helped Katniss and the gang hide when they were trying to infiltrate the Capitol at the very end. And I can't remember the specifics of her life, but I remember her talking about how she used to be of very high status in the Capitol. I don't remember her mentioning that she was Snow's cousin. I don't remember anybody mentioning that. But like I said, she was a very high standing, and then something happened. There must have been a fallout between her and Snow. Something that I'm thinking about is maybe when Snow became president, she was elevated so much to the point that she was actually able to design clothing for some tributes throughout the years. But then I think that her and Snow are going to have some kind of really bad fallout, and she's gonna be knocked down quite a few pegs, which leads her to just having her own clothing store in the Capitol. But I like her character a lot. She's a very supportive cousin to Snow. We see that they do have a very strong bond. There's this quote on 114 from Dr. Gall, who is the head game maker right now, and she's also, I think, a professor at the academy, and she's creepy. Like, she's a creepy scientist. And she says to Snow, "The truth finally, I've no use for liars. What are lies but attempts to conceal some sort of weakness?" And as we know, a very iconic line from Snow to Katniss is something along the lines of, "I think we're beyond lying to each other." And he said, I don't know, he says something that's like, "I have no use for lying." And so I think that that mantra totally comes from Dr. Gall. Even though Snow has expressed being repulsed by her, I definitely think that he kind of respects her a little bit too, and that some of her ideologies become his in the future. There's this quote on 116, because there's been some crazy shit going down throughout this whole book of just violence and death. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil like who dies or what happens, but Snow's inner monologue, he says, he thought of Sejanus telling Dr. Gall it was the government's job to protect everybody, even the people in the districts, but he still wasn't sure how to square that with the fact that they'd been such recent enemies. And then later on in the page it says, "If the people who were supposed to protect you played so fast and loose with your life, then how did you survive? Not by trusting them, that was for sure. And if you couldn't trust them, who could you trust? All bets were off." This was a huge revelation for me. I just realized that the whole thing with Panem is that the Capitol and Panem's leaders have never trusted their own citizens. They have never trusted people in the districts, and they have always thought of them as enemies, even up until, you know, going into the original trilogy. But being that this takes place only 10 years after the war, that is such a fresh idea. And I just feel like until you stop thinking of your own citizens as bad people or enemies, how can you lead them in any possible way? How is it not going to be an oppressive dictatorship, you know? I think in order to be a good leader, you need to have some kind of trust in all of your citizens. You need to treat them in a positive way, you know? Obviously, oppressing your citizens is only going to make them not want to trust you. So then it's just a vicious cycle of people not trusting each other, and so it's always going to be some kind of war. On 257, there's this really amazing quote. I'm not going to go into like specifics of who this is referring to or anything, but it just has a really great callback to the original trilogy. It says, "They created a strange tableau. Rabid boy, trapped girl, bombed out building. It suggested a tale that could only end in tragedy. Star-crossed lovers meeting their fate. A revenge story turned in on itself. A war saga that took no prisoners." And I love that callback to Katniss and Peeta. And then one more thing about the games that are going on so far in this book. First of all, the game started around page 200. I don't think this is very spoilery because obviously we know going into this book that this is going to center around the 10th annual Hunger Games. I don't know, I just get this vibe that this feels much more like the first annual Hunger Games than the 10th annual Hunger Games. With everything that's going wrong, it's very obvious to me that the Capitol still doesn't know what they're doing with the Hunger Games, and you would think after 9 years of doing this that they would have figured out something better, but everything is just so messed up right now, and I'm gonna get into like the specifics of that later on in the video. This book feels completely different from the original trilogy, and like everything feels so different. The writing style even feels different. You would have told me that somebody else wrote this and Suzanne Collins just approved it as part of canon, I would believe you. That's how different this book feels. It has kind of a weird vibe to it. The pacing is okay right now. I think it kind of ebbs and flows. There's just something kind of off about this whole book and this whole story, and obviously, you know, I need to finish it before I give my final judgment about all of this, but I just kind of wanted to give you guys the impression that I'm getting so far. So yeah, I will definitely talk to you guys later. All right, guys, so I finished the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes late last night, and boy, do I have a lot of thoughts. I have a feeling that this clip is going to be a nightmare for me to edit because I have a lot of very scattered thoughts about this book. At first, I was going to give this 4 stars immediately after finishing it, but as I kept thinking about what I like versus what I don't like, the cons started outweighing the pros, and so I am lowering my rating to 3 stars. Okay, where do I start? The things that I liked about this book. I really liked the world building that we got. We got a ton of information about like why the Hunger Games started and how, and we definitely got more information about the war and things like that. I also really liked the cool Easter eggs that Suzanne Collins drops in this book that references the original trilogy. You know, in one of my last updates, I talked about that quote about like the star-crossed lovers. There's also references to like the Katniss plant, of course, which is the thing that Katniss was named after. There's also references to the Katniss plant. We do get answers as to who wrote the Hanging Tree song and the Down in the Valley song. Like a lot of songs that end up getting sung in the original trilogy, we get answers on that. I liked a couple of the major characters. Sejanus gives me total Peeta vibes. He's just so selfless. He's really sweet. You know, he's kind of the opposite of Snow in a lot of ways, and so I do like that kind of juxtaposition between the two of them. I liked Lucy Gray Baird, who, like I said, you know, she is the District 12 tribute for the Hunger Games, and, you know, her and Snow kind of developed this weird romantic relationship. I liked her character a lot. Like I said, she gives me Luna Lovegood vibes. I just feel like she's not the most original character, even though I feel like Suzanne Collins tried to write her character to be this really unique and mysterious and not like other girls type of girl. She also gives me kind of like Manic Pixie Dream Girl vibes. She is kind of that character for Snow at some points, but I think that's pretty much where the pros end for me. The pacing was off for this book the entire time, because really we would get like slower paced passages and then all of a sudden something really exciting and really crazy would happen, and then we would go back to like a slower paced passage and like, you know, kind of meandering around the plot. And that pacing is just not ideal. I just like, I wanted the pacing to be more organic. Also, another criticism that I have about this book is with the actual games themselves. So throughout this book, we're just having like names thrown at us of different tributes. And I think one of the things is that because we're not actually seeing Lucy Gray's POV, we're not seeing the POV of someone who's actually in the games. And so because we're just seeing Snow's POV, like he'll just mention names of other tributes and their mentors, but like we don't have any real connection to these people. So like when people die off, or when like anything shocking happens with these tributes, like I didn't feel anything because I had no connection to them. And I think that's a problem that a lot of people have with this book as well, is that the games just weren't like developed enough. Sometimes I do kind of wish we would have gotten Lucy Gray's POV, but I totally understand why we just stayed with Snow, because Suzanne Collins was trying to keep her character as mysterious as possible. There's literally a quote in here where Lucy says herself, "I'm just a mystery." She knows the type of person that she is, and throughout this whole book from page 1 to the end, she is a very mysterious person. We don't know what she's thinking. So yeah, I understand why we didn't get a dual perspective, but at the same time, like, I kind of wished that we would have gotten some of her POV just so that I can understand what she's thinking at all. So I think that's gonna be it for like my spoiler-free thoughts. So overall, yeah, gave this 3 stars. I would still recommend checking it out for yourself if you are a fan of this world and of the original series. A lot of people have very different opinions. Most people that I've seen have been giving this like 3 stars, maybe 4 stars. I personally haven't seen anyone that I follow give this 5 stars. I think this is a very overall confusing book and a confusing story. Also, you know, I do want to be upfront with you guys that 2 of the major plot points that I wanted out of this book are never really brought up. And so I want you guys to know that going into this book. You are not going to get answers as to why Tigress and Snow now hate each other you know, in the original trilogy. In Mockingjay, when we are introduced to Tigress, it's very clear that they hate each other. We don't get answers about that in this book. We also do not get any answers as to how Snow actually became president. We get the beginnings of how he becomes the type of person that he is in the original trilogy, and we get the beginning of his trajectory from capital citizen to president, but we do not get the full story, and that is very disappointing. And I wanted to include that in the non-spoiler section because I want you guys to go into this book knowing that you are not going to get those answers, and I think you might enjoy this book a little bit more if you're not expecting that. Okay, so that's it for the non-spoiler section. If this is where you are signing off, thank you so much for watching this video. So now on to the spoiler discussion. Again, I'm going to be talking about a lot of things that happened in this book, so if you want to read this book at all and you do not want to be spoiled, definitely click away now. Okay, so I mentioned this in one of my earlier updates that you would think reading this book that this was like the first annual Hunger Games just because of everything that goes wrong during these games. And we're told at the very end of this book that Dr. Gall, who is the game maker, she decides to completely erase these games from history, and that's why we don't hear about them at all in the original trilogy, because these games are pretty notable. A lot of crazy shit happens even before we go into the arena, and crazy shit happens after, given that the victor disappears off the face of the planet. You know, towards the beginning of this book, I want to say around page 100 is where like crazy shit starts going down. And, you know, there's, I think that District 10 tribute slits the throat of what's her name, Arachne or whatever, because she was being like the worst person ever. You know, she was like dangling food in front of her tribute, and so her tribute got fed up and slit her throat. So we had those deaths. You know, then there was that whole situation where they went into the arena for a tour, the bombs went off, and so multiple mentors and tributes died. There was also the situation where during that whole situation, Marcus, who was the District 2 boy, he escaped. And so then when the game started, all of a sudden everybody notices that his body was just like strung up on a pole or something. He wasn't dead yet. And so we get to the games and there's 14 tributes left to compete. What's confusing to me is that you would think they would have replaced all of those tributes. I'm very surprised that they just let the games go on with the 14 tributes. I don't know, that is just weird to me. Also, you know, I mentioned this too, the treatment of the tributes. I don't understand why they think that treating the tributes like shit from day one is going to get any results from them. For one thing, not feeding them and then literally putting them in a zoo, like, what, girl, why do you think that, like, that's okay to do? I mean, obviously the Hunger Games as a whole is a very messed up thing, but like, I don't understand. I mean, Dr. Gall is a very messed up person, and she's the one that, you know, really created the games and is in charge of them. So like, on the one hand, it doesn't surprise me the way that she treats the tributes. And I will say, I guess that's one good thing that Snow has going for him, is that when he's president, the tributes are treated like royalty, as, you know, I kind of think they should be, given the fact that they're about to go into an arena and fight to the death with each other. At the very end of the book, this is page like 508 into 509, like we finally get like a very concrete answer as to why he thinks that the games are good and why they should keep going. So he's talking to Dr. Gall, and he says, they're not just to punish the districts, they're part of the eternal war, which is something that I also talked about in one of my past updates, that, you know, this war never ended. It is still going on, but it's much more of like a Cold War. He says, each one is its own battle, one we can hold in the palm of our hand instead of waging a real war that could get out of our control. He is so all about control throughout this whole book. He talks about that word a lot. And then he says, and they're a reminder of what we did to each other, what we have the potential to do again because of who we are. And then on page 514 into 515, we're having a discussion with Dean Highbottom, and it comes out that he was the one that originally came up with the idea of the Hunger Games. And so he says, the Hunger Games, the evilest impulse cleverly packaged into a sporting event, an entertainment. I was drunk and your father got me drunker still, playing on my vanity as I fleshed the thing out, assuring me it was just a private joke. The next morning I awoke horrified by what I'd made, meaning to rip it to shreds, but it was too late. Without my permission, your father had given it to Dr. Gall. He wanted the grade, you see. I never forgave him. And he goes on to say, it was never meant to be anything more than theoretical, and who but the vilest monster would stage it? As we know, Dr. Gall is a pretty vile person, so like, again, it doesn't surprise me that she would take this idea and make it into a reality. And then Snow says it certainly supports her view of humanity, especially using the children. And why is that? Asks Dean Highbottom. Because we credit them with innocence, and if even the most innocent among us turn to killers in the Hunger Games, what does that say? That our essential nature is violent, Snow explained. Self-destructive, Dean Highbottom murmured. Like, what? This whole discussion is like messed up, because like, you know, he's like, if even the most innocent among us turn into killers, but like, I mean, I kind of get what he's saying, but like, you guys are forcing these kids into the arena to kill each other. There has to be one victor. You know, you guys aren't making it an option that anyone survives. You know, even we've seen in past games that even if all of the tributes refuse to kill each other, the Capitol is gonna find ways to kill these tributes anyway throughout the games. Like, I don't know, I just feel like this argument is so like messed up and weird, and like, I mean, I kind of get where they're getting at, but like at the same time I'm just like, what? Okay, so this part kind of made me laugh just because of how ridiculous and like hypocritical Snow is. So I'm on page like 285. He has just dropped that handkerchief of Lucy's into that snake tank so that when the snakes are released into the arena, they will not attack Lucy, right? And so Snow kind of talks about how he's like descending into being like this shady person because of the things that he's doing that might be counted as cheating, and it is counted as cheating later on in the book. He says, what awaited him farther down that slope if he was unable to stop his descent? What else might he be capable of? Well, that was it. It stopped now. If he didn't have honor, he had nothing. No more deception, no more shady strategies, no more rationalization. From now on, he'd live honestly, and if he ended up as a beggar, at least he would be a decent one. The reason why this makes me laugh is literally 5 pages later, he's shown up at like Sejanus's house, and he's trying to find a way to manipulate his father into paying him for saving Sejanus's life. This is after that part where Sejanus literally goes into the arena, and what happens, I think he's like kneeling over Marcus's body, and so Dr. Gall is like, yo, you need to get him out of there, because if the peacekeepers go in there, he might go ballistic. And so Snow does go in there and save his life. And so like the way he's like kind of trying to manipulate Sejanus's father to pay him for saving his life, I'm like, you're the one that just said that like you need honor and like you're gonna be a better person, and here you are like trying to manipulate somebody out of money. Okay, so next I want to discuss this whole romance between Snow and Lucy Gray. For one thing, I don't think either one of them actually falls in love with the other. Part of me feels like Lucy Gray from the get-go was kind of manipulating Snow by flirting with him and developing this romantic relationship with him. you know, because she does want to survive these games, of course, like anybody does, but she is a very performative person. You know, she is a singer. She knows how to work a crowd. She knows how to perform in front of people and to get people to like her. And so I personally think that from the get-go, she's kind of manipulating Snow so that he will help her even more in the games, and it works. You know, he makes sure that she gets all the sponsors that she could ever want. And you know, he does some pretty shady things with like the rat poison. On Snow's part, I do not think that he actually falls in love with her. I don't think he knows what real romantic love is. Throughout this whole book, the things that he thinks about Lucy, there's even a quote, I think towards the beginning of this book, where Snow recognizes that he has a very obsessive personality. He definitely can fixate on like one thing or one person and completely become obsessed with him. We see that in the original trilogy. I mean, come on, he literally becomes obsessed with Katniss. I think part of that is because there's like a little tiny part of Katniss that reminds him of Lucy, and I think that makes him go crazy a bit. And then also I have this direct quote on page 316 where he says, "But the point was he got to keep her, and he wanted to keep her, safe and close at hand, admired and admiring, devoted, and entirely unequivocally his." He never really talks about actually loving this girl. He always just talks about her in a very possessive, obsessive way, and it's very strange. Oh my god, the scene towards the end where they were gonna like run off together and maybe go to District 13. I think they just said like going north. And then, I don't know, they're in that cottage and Lucy leaves, but then he finds the murder weapon that he used to kill Mayfair, who is the mayor's daughter. Now that he's found the murder weapon, he can destroy it, he can hide it, he can make sure that nobody ever finds it, he can get away with this murder, and so he can go back to the Peacekeepers, you know, and kind of live on the rest of his life. And so then I think he realizes that like Lucy knows too much, and he also realizes that Lucy's probably never coming back. Like he realizes that now Lucy's got his number. Lucy knows the shit that he's done. You know, they had that weird conversation where Lucy was like, "Okay, so who was the third person you killed?" And he was like, "Oh, my old self." You know, like, it's like, no girl, like, you pretty much killed Sejanus. And so he ends up going like nuts. He's trying to find Lucy. We know that his goal is gonna be to murder her, and I love the way that she outsmarts him. You know, till the very end, she's a very mysterious character. We don't know what's happened to her. I personally think that she made it to District 13 and she lived out the rest of her life there. Another interesting theory that people have is that Maud Ivory, who was like that little girl that was also in their band, that she's Katniss's grandmother. So that's a very interesting theory if you guys didn't know about that one. I don't really know if there's a lot of evidence behind that. I think just because of like who Katniss's father was, that kind of points to the fact that maybe Maud Ivory is his mother. But yeah, just like the whole way that their like romance arc ends, I think it's kind of iconic, and it also just reminds me of like those romantic thrillers where like the guy literally like loses his mind at the end and just tries to kill his love interest. That's totally what it became. I also loved that quote where Snow was like, "It's now our own personal Hunger Games, you know, it's the two of them against each other." Also, I wanted to say that Lucy Gray is apparently the title of a poem where a girl gets lost in the woods and possibly dies in a snowstorm. And I think that is a really cool connection to this story. I don't think that Snow actually got the chance to shoot her. I think there's like a little sentence where like he hears cries, but I think that's from like the Mockingjays. I don't think that's from her actually getting shot, because at this point he's very delirious. He's just like shooting randomly into the forest. I think she got a big head start on him, and I think that she got out, and yeah, so I think she ended up in District 13. Also, I will say I actually liked the plot twist right after the Hunger Games. Okay, I will say the way that the Hunger Games ended was very like fast and abrupt and kind of like anticlimactic, just not very exciting. And also, come on girl, we knew from the get-go that Lucy Gray was gonna win. But then like Dean Highbottom is like, "Yo, Snow, I know what you did, girl, so like I'm gonna send you to the Peacekeepers, bye." So he ends up in District 12, of course, and that's how he reunites with Lucy, and I actually really liked that plot twist. Also, something that I think is like really iconic is the fact that Snow absolutely despises despises mockingjays. He absolutely hates them, and I think that's an amazing connection to the original trilogy because it really shows why he goes so crazy over Katniss being known as the Mockingjay. So he just keeps talking about how mockingjays are just unnatural and they shouldn't exist because mockingjays happened when these jabberjays were just kind of left alone by the capital, and then they mated with mockingbirds, and so mockingjays became a new species. I also enjoyed this passage on like page 414. We're getting a real sense of how these jabberjays actually work. He's talking to this doctor, Dr. K, and then Coriolanus asks, you know, how did the rebels manage to discover what these jabberjays do, and then, you know, how did they manage to essentially corrupt them? And the doctor says, more likely we didn't cover our tracks, didn't make sure that the information we acted on could have had a source other than a recording in the woods. So I really like that we get a lot of insight into like how these birds work. Something else that I think is very interesting, and a lot of people had already predicted this going into the book, is that Lucy Gray, you know, being a musician, being a songwriter, she wrote not only the Down in the Valley song, she also was the one who wrote the Hanging Tree song. This song has always confused me because, like, and even after reading this book, I'm still confused as to who this song is about. First of all, I have a feeling that Snow's interpretation is straight up wrong. He thinks that in the end, let's see, he thinks in the end it's from Billy Tope's perspective, who was Lucy's ex-boyfriend. He says, let's see, he'd witnessed Arlo's death, heard the birds call out his last words, begged Lucy Gray to run away to freedom with him, and when she'd rejected him, wanted her to hang with him rather than get to live without him. Coriolanus hoped that this was the last Billy Tope song. Like, is that really what this song is about? Okay, this is what confuses me, because Lucy finished writing this song before she fully discovered that Snow killed 3 people. However, what an interesting coincidence it is that, you know, the first few lyrics of the song are where they strung up a man they say murdered 3. Snow murdered 3 people. Is that just a really strong coincidence, or is this song about him? And did Lucy figure out that he killed 3 people before they talked about it in the woods? Like, that's what I'm confused about. I don't know, who is this song about? Who is this, you know, who is the perspective? I still don't understand. I feel like I should look up like a full analysis of the lyrics just because like I'm still so confused, but I hope I'm not the only one. I hope I'm not just like an idiot, you know? But yeah, I think that's everything for my spoilery discussion points. I am definitely left feeling like, what was the point of this story? I feel like Suzanne Collins could have gone in a lot of different directions, and I'm not the biggest fan of the direction she chose to go with this story. Also, I feel like it was kind of a mistake for me to read all 4 books in this series in the span of 5 days, because after I finished this book last night, my brain was just like so messed up. At the same time, I'm glad that I read this. I would have read it eventually anyway, but at the same time, I totally see why some people completely hate this book, and I also understand why people really enjoyed this book. I just don't think it was the best written prequel I've ever read, and I don't think Suzanne Collins went in the best direction as far as, you know, choosing what to center a prequel on. I think Snow as a main character, he wasn't compelling enough. I found his perspective to be a little bit boring. He's just not the most interesting person. As you can tell, I'm very conflicted about this book, as a lot of people are. So yeah, with that being said, that's going to be it for this reading vlog / discussion video. If you guys want to leave your thoughts down below, I would love it if you would keep spoilers out of it, but if you have to include a spoiler, definitely put like some kind of spoiler alert. I definitely want to discuss this book further with you guys because this book definitely warrants further discussion. Also, one more thing I wanted to say, I do think this book was a little too long. It's like over 500 pages. I think that Suzanne could have edited out maybe 50 to 100 pages and the story would have had the same impact. So that's my final thought on this book. Thank you guys so much for watching. I would love it if you would push that like button and subscribe, and I thank you if you do. And with that being said, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!